Welcome to another special edition of the Liberty Without Compromise broadcast with your hosts, Dan and Donna Wilson. Before we bring our guest on tonight, we want to set clear and careful context for this conversation. Late last week, we conducted a special live stream where we shared deeply troubling information that had been disclosed to us by a family member of Pastor Paul Van Noy. What was revealed involved long-standing concealed harm within the family, information that fundamentally altered public understanding of who Paul Van Noy is and what has been protected for decades. That family member is Joy, Paul Van Noy's niece. Joy came forward after extensive direct conversations with her mother, Judy, Paul Van Noy's sister. These conversations were not brief or casual. They were vivid, detailed, and painful. Joy is here with her mother's full knowledge and permission, sharing her mother's firsthand accounts exactly as they have been told to her. Some have attempted to downplay this information because it is Joy speaking publicly, not Judy herself. What those skeptics ignore is that Joy and her mother have been in continuous direct communication over many days, revisiting events that were buried by silence, fear, and family pressure. Joy is not speculating. She is conveying her mother's lived experience with consent, clarity, and courage. On last week's broadcast, we shared what Joy told us. Tonight is different. Tonight, Joy has chosen to join us so you can hear from her directly about the family background, the culture of silence, Paul Van Noy's history within the church, and what it means when abuse is not only committed, but protected. This conversation is not about rumor or revenge. It is about truth that has been carried quietly for decades and the cost of continuing to look away. Viewer discretion is advised. We thank you for joining us.
Episode 52 of this special edition of the Liberty Without Compromise broadcast. Let's go back and review for those of you who have not been following or coming into this part way. About a month ago, the daughter of senior pastor Paul Van Noy, Candlelight Christian Fellowship in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, on an X post showed the world that her father had overlooked, covered up her own sex assault. It began when she was a little girl in her very own bedroom. A neighbor man breaks into her bedroom, sexually assaults her. Paul Van Noy knows about this, and rather than doing the right thing, calling law enforcement, Paul covers it up. And nobody knows why, especially his very own daughter. And to make matters worse, others have come up after they heard what Daniel had stated about her father. Remember that Paul went ahead and he confirmed that what Danielle had said is true, but he never gave an explanation. And there has been a cover-up that has been ongoing for many years, probably decades. The truth has been slowly coming out. Others in the congregation, while they were children, that were abused by church staff members, their own stepfathers. Paul had this knowledge and refused to remove these predators from church, as well as to protect the innocent. Paul, in his own words, just leaked here a week ago, admits to molesting a neighbor's daughter. And then he tries to come back and call it back in and say, well, they were just playing doctor. They were at the same age, 5 years old. And then another story came out about his very own sister and years of molestation that occurred between him and his younger sister while they were teenagers. Now, today, we have Paul Van Noy's niece, it's his sister's daughter, on with us to go into a little more of what exactly is going on. Where did Paul come from? Who is he? And we're hoping that we're going to be able to shed more light onto who this fraud is that is currently leading this congregation in Coeur d'Alene. Welcome, Joy.
Hi.
We appreciate you. We appreciate you coming on, and just give us a little bit of a background. how are you related to Paul, and where did you grow up?
So I am the niece of Paul Van Noy. So he is my mom's brother. Um, my mom being the individual in question, right? I live currently just outside of Sacramento, where my family has lived essentially forever. My family originated from like the Fresno area, moved up here, and all of my mom's childhood, they lived in the area.
So Paul and your mother, his sister, grew up in Sacramento.
Yes.
What was their childhood like?
Um, it was tough. My grandpa was very much a legalist in every sense of the word. They were very committed to the church and the church's teachings. If anybody knows anything about the Assemblies of God Church, just, if that gives any kind of context, that's 100% where my family was. That being said, my grandpa was a very physical man. He was very physically abusive with my mom and her siblings. There are 4 of them in total. And to say that he was physically abusive would be just the tip of the iceberg. He was also mentally and emotionally abusive at that.
And so there are, you say, a total of 4 siblings. Are they all full siblings? Are they step or half, or how are they related?
So I have 2 older uncles as well who were half siblings. They were all related back through my grandpa. But the older 2 had different moms. And then there was my Uncle Paul, and then my mom, who had the same mom and dad. Not long after my mom, well, I guess a few years after my mom was born, my grandma was diagnosed with cancer that had already metastasized throughout her body. And so she died when my mom was about 8. My grandpa then soon after remarried. When my mom was 9 or 10, I want to say.
So the house was busy, but it was also a little bit chaotic, I'm guessing, with the older boys coming and going out of the house. Or did they live with your mom and uncle full time?
No, they definitely lived elsewhere for part of the time as well. They had their own moms who they would go live with, and then they would come back to live with my grandpa as well. So there was definitely a lot of movement that happened.
And they were all at this time a part of an Assembly of God. So your Uncle Paul and your mother were raised under the Assembly of God denomination. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. They were the kind of family that would go multiple times a week. Sunday for sure. They'd go to prayer groups and stuff during the week. They'd go to youth groups, things of that nature. So they were kind of always in church.
So your uncle, he grew up in the church and had probably a pretty good knowledge of church workings. He was exposed to it. We heard a clip last week, and maybe here in a second, if Donna can find it, we're going to pull it up, where he brags about being, a gangster, that he was a pretty bad dude. He was violent. He robbed restaurants with butcher knives, and he broke into homes and all sorts of things. What point in his life did he get into gangs?
He was a teenager. From all of the stories that I've heard him tell, as well as stories that my mom has told us and my grandparents have told us, he was a teenager when he was involved with gangs. And it was a pretty stark turnaround. I'd say for a few years, he was heavily involved. It was something he bragged about in my youth. In fact, I remember sitting around at like family holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, things like that with my uncle, and listening to him tell these stories, and just kind of being shocked.
And so these were legit street gangs that he was a part of.
Yes.
Criminal street gangs.
Yes. I don't know the extent of it, obviously, like I was a child, but my mom, in talking with her over the last handful of weeks, has confirmed everything that he said in those videos to be true, or in those recordings.
How did he go from, inside a family dysfunctional? We're going to talk about that a little more here shortly, but you go from this dysfunction, but yet going to weekly and several times a week church services. How did he end up in these gangs?
I honestly am not 100% sure. From the way that the stories have been told, the lore is just that he fell in with the wrong crowd, which never made a whole lot of sense. Even as a young child, it didn't make sense how you go from going to church several times a week and being heavily involved in like youth ministry and things like that to suddenly being in a gang.
Do you know if he had any arrests or convictions, any jail time?
I don't think he did. That was never part of the lore. He always just told these stories as sort of his like ministerial thing.
Kind of like this is what I was before I became
a believer. It became his story of redemption, his testimony, and he really built, for lack of a better word, a religious empire around that as a foundation.
Literally his entire persona. Yes.
I did find that audio if you want to
let's
play
go
that
ahead
now,
and play
and then
this audio
continue.
that we received from an anonymous source here last week. It is sensitive, so if you have anybody that is prone to what would I say that shouldn't be listening to it, you may want to bring them out now. Let's go ahead and play this.
If I told you the senior pastors, the Ministerial Association, Koinonia House, the church I pastored before I came here, the members of this church, everything that I did in my early life, I robbed people. I was a gangbanger. I was a drug dealer. I robbed one restaurant with a butcher knife. I was pastor at Calvary Chapel in Livermore. I was an intern at Capital Christian Center. I have been actively involved in ministry for 40 years. And nobody knows that I molested my next door neighbor's daughter. Truth. I was a teenager. I was a stupid kid. Hey, come over. I want to see your thing. Let me see it. That I robbed people, broke into houses, robbed restaurants at knife point, was a gangbanger, drug dealer. I was a terrible human.
So
nobody knows that.
We hear him saying all these incredible things. He must have been quite the skilled criminal too, to do these things and to never get caught by law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, listening to it makes me physically ill.
Yeah, we've heard this many times, and it sounds, when I hear it, braggadocious. Sounds like that he's, actually secretly, what a badass, somebody that has repented from this lifestyle, like he tries to imply, but yet the inflections in his voice, the excitement, the delight that goes along with his narrative doesn't sound like somebody that really either one is truly sorry of that, or number two is reliving embellished stories.
And we had a linguistics expert chime in, Richard Whitehead, and that was very much in line with what he had to say in something that is an expert field of his, and that was his review of that audio.
So
that's kind of how it feels. from my point of view too, it sounds like something he's proud of. And I'm sorry, but I don't know why that would be something you're proud of. It's embarrassing. Like, don't get me wrong. I love my uncle. I love my family, but I do not understand why we're telling this story in this way.
Yeah. Let's step back a little bit. You came out to tell your side of the family's story, not because Dan Wilson and Donna Wilson were talking about it online. My understanding is that you saw your cousin's post, Danielle Van Noy, and you saw the way people were reacting to her online, and that did something to you.
Yeah. I am a survivor of sexual assault as well. And I also work with an incredibly vulnerable population. I am studying to get my MFT, and I work in a group home. So these are kids who are being taken from their homes by CPS, and there's systems involved in one respect or another. They're in the hospital. They have some sort of, mental illness. They are either avoiding juvenile hall or something like that. And so these kids are all incredibly vulnerable. They are, gang affiliated. They're sick. They're struggling. And these are kids that, due to my own trauma, I vow to protect. When there was no one there to listen to my story, I want to be there to listen to theirs. I want to do what I can to make sure that they're protected. And so when I see my cousin speak out and say, yeah, this is a thing that happened to me and nobody protected me, how can I turn a blind eye?
Yeah.
How can I not say something?
Well, we're glad that you did do just that you came out, and initially we had a conversation for, about an hour, and you shared some extremely detailed information with us, sensitive information. In fact, I'd like to go back and visit that just briefly. We don't need to dwell a lot on it, but you had a discussion with your mother, Paul's full biological sister, younger sister, as we were having this conversation about Danielle and not only her assault that never went reported to law enforcement as far as we know. You had a take on things that you and your mom wanted to share, especially right after that clip that we just played where Paul brags that he had molested his next door neighbor's daughter.
Yeah. So I approached the two of you because I wanted to give context. My uncle is obviously a lot of things. And sorry, I'm choosing my words carefully.
Take as much time as you need.
I look at this situation and am deeply saddened, obviously. I knew that there was a lot of things that happened in my family that are not ideal. But I never knew the extent of them. So I reached out to my mom because I wanted to be able to kind of speak to where this pattern came from. She told me a story of the physical abuse, the sexual abuse of each other. Not just my uncle and her, but of her two brothers, three brothers as well. It was something that was unfortunately perpetuated throughout the family. And when my mom reported to my grandpa that this happened, his response was, whatever, it happens to everybody, and to just brush it off as if nothing happened. And
Wow.
yeah. And so I took that and kind of took a step back and went, okay, so this kind of makes sense now. When we're ignoring the abuse of our children, when we're ignoring the abuse of the children in ministry, when we're ignoring the abuse of neighbors, when we're enacting that abuse, it doesn't take on the same, don't get me wrong, it's still incredibly wrong, but it doesn't take on the same tone. It is suddenly about perpetuating unhealed trauma. And that is where things get tricky, because we want to, have that in mind when talking about these things, while still not negating the fact that we're perpetuating this on children. That's where I start to go, I can't. No, it's one thing to go like, hey, maybe you should get therapy. And it's a whole other thing to say you're dangerous at this point.
So how long, just to make certain that we had our facts straight last week, how long did the abuse take place between your Uncle Paul against your mom, his sister?
From what I understand, for a few years. It's a little murky still, just because of the nature of trauma and how trauma can kind of muddy the waters and mess with your memory. But my mom has shared with me that it started soon after my grandpa married my grandma. There was a lot going on in the house. There was, grandpa was at work, grandma was at work. They were latchkey kids. My two uncles were in and out of the house. And so there was a lot happening. But it was soon after my grandpa remarried, and it went on for a few years.
And to this day, it has never been properly addressed. It has never been repented of, atoned for. Nothing. Is that correct?
Not until, from what it sounds like, not until just the other day. He called my mom and had a conversation with her that felt icky. I've had a few conversations with my mom where we've kind of talked about like the narrative that she plays for herself as a victim. She feels as though she's perpetuated it somehow by engaging in it. Because it was something that they did together. And I've had to really kind of low-key work with her on helping her understand that she was the youngest in this scenario, and it's not her fault that she was manipulated and gaslit into doing and believing these things. And she finally got to the point after talking with myself and my sister that she was like, okay, yes, no, agreed. I believe you. I hear you. And then she has this conversation with him a few days ago, and she's back to thinking that she somehow has enacted this abuse.
So there was no, hey, I repent. I am sorry. Please forgive me for what I was doing to you in this incestuous sexual acting that he was performing on your mother.
Not as far as I know. From what she explained to me, the first words out of his mouth were, "Am I being recorded?"
Is there anything else you can tell us about the course of that conversation that your mom might have shared with you? What was there resolution of some sort? Maybe he thought there was resolution. You had mentioned it left her feeling pretty gross, so that
as if she had initiated and or been a part of it.
Yeah. As far as I know, there was no real resolution. She didn't go into a ton of detail. I mean, to some degree, it's her brother. So to some degree, she's going to want to protect him, right? Especially if in her mind, she was a player in all of this and not just a pawn.
Sure.
And she did leave the conversation with kind of a strange, but she let me know that he wanted to have a face-to-face conversation with me, seeing as I'm the one speaking out now.
How do you feel about that?
I think it's weird. I told her in no uncertain terms that if he did reach out, which I know that he won't, I will absolutely be recording that conversation because I don't feel safe speaking with him. He made it clear over a decade ago that I was not welcome as part of his family. This was back before I even had my own child, when I was just trying to find somebody to marry myself and my husband at the time. And so I have stopped communicating with him for a general purpose of my own mental health.
So let's kind of move on from this gross and hard topic. And I want to dive in a little more to family dynamics.
Yeah.
Was your mom prior to this and your family close with Paul and Brenda and your cousins, like say for the past 15, 20 years? I know that you said that for 10 years, you haven't really had contact, when he let it be known that, in essence, you weren't approved or however you worded that, I don't recall. But what was the family dynamic like for the past 15, 20 plus years?
Prior to him writing me off, we were a very close-knit group. We honestly, prior to my grandpa's death, in 2004, we were a very close-knit group. They were always down for the holidays. They would kind of come up with any excuse to be here, that they could. Family reunions, holidays, birthdays, what have you. They were here a lot. And then after my grandpa's death, they just sort of disappeared. Or I guess not disappeared, just they weren't as present. And largely the extent of our relationship then was on Facebook, essentially. They'd come periodically. My uncle would come down independently to check on my grandma and, to help with things around her house or what have you. Especially when she went to sell their house. He got very involved there. And it all felt very kind of controlling. It wasn't that like happy-go-lucky Uncle Paul. It was the like taskmaster that showed up.
What year was this?
When she sold her house?
Mm-hmm.
Oh God. I don't know. I'd have to go look it up, but I know that I was in high school.
Over 10 years ago.
Yeah, it wasn't when I was in high school. It was this was actually when, my ex-husband and I were trying to get married, that she ended up selling her house because we were helping her clean everything out of her house for the movers, to move her from her house that she was living in with my grandpa to the house that she's in now. And he and I had a big argument because he didn't like that I stood up for myself.
So Paul,
so this is probably like 2012-ish.
So over 10 to 12 years ago.
Yeah.
At least. Okay. So when Paul was living down there before he moved to Idaho, at some point he had this conversion where he went from gangbanger, really bad dude, to, it sounds like a pretty charismatic preacher. What can you tell us about that? When was his conversion, and does the family have much record on that?
I'm sure they do. I could go digging around for you. I don't know quite when it was that this conversion happened. I know he had to have been a young adult. One of the stories I have most vividly in mind was the story of him working at a movie theater, and there was a quote unquote Wiccan, who also worked there. And my uncle was so overcome with the power of the Holy Spirit that he would pray that this man would be saved. And the man, as walking by, would fall to the ground and cry out in pain because the demon in his body was affected by my uncle. So that's the narrative that has been given by my family about my uncle.
Who witnessed that? Was that just a Paul story, or was that witnessed by other people?
I have no idea where that came from because none of my family was present for that. I'm fairly certain it was a story that he told. There may have been other people around. I have no idea.
You said when we had spoken about that briefly before, there was this persona around Paul within the family that it was almost like these supernatural, that may have been the word you used, supernatural powers or abilities. Is there, did it center around that as the crux of it, or that story that came back? How, after this time of conversion, how did the family view him differently, or his father, or the parental dynamic? What were their hopes for him, or what was the relationship like then, from then forward?
So to say that he was placed on a pedestal, I think would be putting it mildly. He has always been talked about as if he's revered. Names have meaning, right? And so when we pick names, we are inadvertently, whether we mean to or not, we are putting the power of that name, that word, onto that person. And my family very much felt as though this was Paul, as if his transformation from the gangbanger while he was Saul to Paul. And that was the gravity with which my family talked about him. And some of my family still does.
Really?
Yes. My grandma actually is still in full support of my uncle, which, bless her heart, she has her own trauma, is alarming to me.
So your uncle has this Saul to Paul conversion, almost like one of the original apostles, with this power to make demonic people writhe on the floor when he passes by. And I mean, faith healing. What other things? He's put on a pedestal, but
definitely some faith healing. There's been a lot of, like his messages they convert people all of the time. And he's talked about as if he's this like voice calling out, like an apostle, John, and he's here to convert the masses. He is the voice calling out, here to bring people in and save the masses.
That then leads to what you described as a very thriving ministry in the area there in California, in or around those areas. To talk about the span of time of ministry there versus how did they, if that was thriving, how do they end up in Idaho? Because they've been here now for
30 years.
Yeah, quite a long time.
Yeah, so they moved to Idaho, I want to say either shortly after I was born or before I was born. I never knew them to live in California. I thought that they were like from Idaho. My dumb little kid brain didn't understand how that worked. I just knew that they lived in Idaho and that's where they were from. And it wasn't until I was a little bit older, I want to say like 10 or 11, that it like clicked that they were from here. But there was a lot of stories about how he was a pastor in the area. He went to Capital Christian Center and was a pastor there, I guess interned from what he said. There was a church in Livermore that was at one point the Wayward Chapel that he was a pastor at. And there's some, I guess, drama there with the sale of the church and things of that nature. He was a pastor further south, from what I understand, closer to where my Aunt Brenda's parents lived. And they ended up moving from California to Idaho to escape a scandal, essentially. The story goes that my Aunt Brenda was having several affairs with people in the church that were obviously inappropriate. And in an act of control, my uncle moved the family from where they were to Idaho to escape that.
Now, I have to ask this: is this confirmed or is this speculation? Because we want to be real careful, especially here on Liberty Without Compromise, from presenting anything that you can't firsthand verify. But what's your evidence for this?
It's a story that was talked about in hush, reverent tones. It didn't get talked about a whole lot. We do.
Who was talking about you and your family, or outside, or who?
My family. Yeah, no. My mom and other family members as well. It's been confirmed through Danielle and her husband Gordon that the affair did occur, and that is part of the reason that they moved.
But you mentioned that they moved up here, and then you said there was something about a sale of a home or something that was not on the up and up.
Yeah, it was the Wayward Chapel, which was owned by Calvary Chapel, or was converted into Calvary Chapel, but Calvary Chapel owned it. And my uncle sold it out from underneath Calvary Chapel. I don't know why that was never dealt with appropriately. But he did not sell that building in the manner in which he should have. And so there's kind of some speculation about why, but that was not his church to sell.
Well, I want to go back. So at this time, he's in, you say, Livermore at the Wayward Church, Wayward Chapel. Was Wayward Chapel part of the Assembly of God, or was it Calvary Chapel, or did it convert?
It was Calvary Chapel, which is part of the Assemblies of God Church.
So was he at this time a full-time pastor? Was he an associate? Was he lead pastor? What was his position?
I'm like 90% sure that at this point he was a full pastor.
And so he was living in a church provided home that the church owned?
I would assume so.
And then
I wish that I could speak more to it, but
sure.
like I said, this all happened before I was even born.
Sure. So then you were saying that the church was the church building, the home that they were living in, I guess a parsonage for lack of a better term. Somehow he was able to sell it as if he were the owner of that title and deed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so there's been some discussion about that as well. It's actually the reason that he's not affiliated with Calvary Chapel and is not allowed to be affiliated with Calvary Chapel.
Interesting. And again, I have to ask, do you have confirmation in some form that is true, that he's not allowed to be associated with Calvary Chapel?
Not directly. It was something that I was talking with my mom about, trying to get further information about that, but she was even kind of murky on the details.
Sure.
She was going through her own abuse at that point as well.
So the family moves from California, I assume, how many kids did he have at this time between him
4.
and Brenda?
There were 4.
So there was 4 of them, and then they moved all the way up here to Idaho. And at that point, Paul, does he land at another area church? Does he start one? What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's when he started not Calvary Chapel. Sorry, that's when he started Candlelight, supposedly out of his home, and that was kind of how Candlelight ministry started. Was that like quote unquote grassroots effort?
And do you know how they chose Idaho? How did they choose the greater Coeur d'Alene area?
I honestly have no idea. My guess is it was just not there. It was just not in California anymore, and it was probably a decent price.
In the clip earlier that we played of your uncle talking, he mentioned that if the Ministerial Association and if Koinonia House, which we know is based right here in Post Falls, the late Chuck Missler had been the head of that organization for a long time. They did a lot of expository Bible teaching. Do you know how your uncle got involved with the Misslers or how that came to be?
I'm fairly certain that it all happened while he was still in California. Chuck Missler has just as big of an influence here. In fact, it was someone who we talked about all the time at family dinners. And, Chuck Missler was like, yeah, like that's the man. He's out there with like, I don't know how much you guys know about this area, but Buzz Oates is a very big name out here. And not affiliated necessarily with churches in any way, but a huge business mogul. And they're talked about in the same regard.
But Buzz and the late Chuck Missler.
Yes.
Is Buzz Oates still alive?
I don't think so. I believe he died. He was as old as my grandpa. My grandma had always said that if he were, I think he's dead, because I believe she said if he were still alive, he would be a good next husband for her.
Yeah, she's got moxie.
Yeah.
So they came up here. They established their own. It sounds like an actual in-house, real home church, and eventually it grew into the mega church, relatively speaking, that it has become right here in Coeur d'Alene. So, how long did that take for that process from where they went from home to the big building that they're in now?
I'm not totally sure. But I remember being very young and him talking about how big his church was, and that being a very large part of his identity. Like, oh, I'm a pastor of a huge church in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And like, that was his big thing that he would always tell us kids, as his kind of like, I can't think of the word now, but it's, this is who I am. This is the evidence
identity
for, why you should believe me when I talk about biblical things, and why grandpa looks at me instead of other pastors and things like that. Like, because I have the big, important church.
It must have been pretty interesting living with a celebrity pastor as your uncle. When the families did get together, how was it between the families? You said that they used to come down there quite often. Do you guys have contact between the cousins, or has that been strained as well, or the rest of the extended family?
It's been incredibly strained. So growing up, I was really close with Noelle and Joel. They were a little closer in age to me. Danielle, on the other hand, was always kind of off to the side. She was talked about as if something was wrong with her. She's troubled. She doesn't want to be part of the family, things like that. And so we didn't really have much of a relationship with her. My sister did, because she was also tall and skinny and pretty. And so they kind of lumped them together. But we still didn't talk to her much. We talked to the other siblings, but not so much to Danielle, just because she was always kind of pushed off to the side.
Sounds like that the family has, like many families, a lot of different dynamics.
Yeah.
And this kind of, does often occur in extended families. But, kind of coming back full circle, we started this conversation because you were concerned about the way Danielle had been treated online. And I want to say this again. When this all started, it was, for us, unexpected. We had begun exposing well over almost a year after my failed election for sheriff in Kootenai County had taken place, because we had a supporter that had been a former parishioner that really wanted to know why Paul, your uncle, had not supported me, or was not supporting me or giving me the time of day during the campaign. Many people were curious as to why that was. We went on to discuss that to our audience, I don't know, 5-6 weeks ago. And it was during these different videos that we produced where we had played hidden recordings of conversations between your uncle and a former Department of Homeland Security agent with this parishioner, a young lady who wanted to meet with her pastor, your uncle, to discuss things. And he brings this former Fed. And then at some point he had mentioned in the undercover recording, one of his quotes was, ministry's been hard on our family. My children have paid a price, and my daughter has renounced her faith and moved to New York. And apparently that was the catalyst for Danielle and her husband, Gordon, to drop their very detailed, lengthy post on X and other social media platforms where Danielle, among other things, confronts her father publicly. Here is a text message, Dad, that you sent to me just this July on my birthday, where you admit to not protecting me, Danielle, from Jacob Saldana, not protecting Danielle from Todd Ingalls. Todd Ingle. And then there was this rush to discredit Danielle. Oh, this isn't her. This is made up. Wilson's made this up. She's not real. There's no way to verify, except for she had a blue check mark, as I recall, on her Twitter profile or X profile. And then Paul, because Paul does this quite often, he verified publicly through a Facebook post that his daughter's post was true. And that point, people then started to shift once more. There were those that were disgusted, and there were those that are, even to this day, continually protecting Paul, saying that this is a private matter that should be between families, that it shouldn't be public, that, her father, Danielle's father, Paul, being a pastor, wanted to minister to this man that broke into her bedroom while this precious girl was sleeping at what should have been the most safest place on earth for her to be, and to make it worse, instead of reporting it to law enforcement or going over to the neighbor and taking matters into his own hands, like many fathers that I know would want to do. Instead, he decides that for the good of not ruining this young man's reputation, that he was going to let it slide and then possibly help restore him. And to make matters worse, his daughter, your cousin Danielle, was shoved to the side She was told by the inaction that she doesn't matter. She, to the best of our knowledge, from what we know, was never treated by any counselors or therapist for her trauma. And then Paul, in all of his infinite wisdom, while your aunt was running even a daycare center out of this house that Danielle grew up in, would have her abuser, her sexual assaulter, come onto their property to perform routine maintenance on the sprinkler systems and or other things in the yard. And we had people come on just this very weekend scoffing, going, oh my goodness, the guy that was, assaulting the daughter, he allowed the guy to come in twice a year and work on his sprinklers. Big whoop-de-doo. So we have seen all sorts of heinous, unchristian-like behavior out of what I'm going to call you wicked, evil people that are falsely claiming the name of Christ because you're not following the scripture. You're not following the fact that Jesus said that if any of you cause one of these little ones to stumble, you'd be better off putting a big old millstone around your neck and being tossed into the sea. What do you say about these people that are so vicious towards Danielle and your family in support of your uncle?
It makes me sick. I have a lot of feelings about it. My uncle protecting these people and allowing them to regularly attend his church, do work on his house, it's despicable. And the people who are in full support of my uncle allowing this to happen, it makes me sick. I know, so before I went into psychology, I was actually a religion major planning on going into seminary. So I've done a lot of reading of the Bible, and I know that there are verses where it is very clear that these are the sins that God detests. That's not a small word. One of them is exactly what is being protected by my uncle. We are not at liberty as human beings to forgive those sins. That's up to God, not us. I don't have that kind of celestial authority. Can you forgive? Sure, whatever. Forget? Not so much. Employ them? No, thank you. Bring them around my family, my kids, my parishioners' kids? Absolutely not. That's disgusting. These are people that you are supposed to protect. And the people who are blindly sitting by and going, oh, yes, Paul all of the way. I have a lot of questions about why they are so ready to blindly believe everything that this man is saying, despite the fact that it has been proven otherwise.
It's because when he walks by, people fall over, writhing as their demons are screaming in agony.
Apparently.
The part of the other thing that's made this tough is you have he's got 4 kids, and 3 of them have been very vocal, coming out in support of. I also have evidence even just today where Joel Van Noy, they're hot on like private messaging people trying to stay on top of this. Talk to us briefly about that, because we know on the surface how that looks. Like that lends credibility to Danielle was the wayward child, moves to New York, and here Paul has the loving support. And they are, in fact, literally saying, Noelle today, one of her posts, my dad is a faithful, loving man, gentle, and was describing him in all this way. What do you know about the family dynamic, why this would make sense that you've got the 3 here supporting their dad and corroborating like his side of the story, and why congregants should continue to support him? and why Danielle's just crazy, which is really in unison how they're the light they're putting it in.
Well, this was something that I was actually speaking with my mom about this morning, and I think speaks heavily to who my uncle is as a human being, not even just as a pastor, just as a dad. From what I am seeing and the way that his family behaves, he keeps people around him who need him. My cousins have had no end of trouble, as Joel has pointed out online, that he's not perfect, right? They've had no end of trouble with the law. They've gotten themselves stuck in sticky situations. And my uncle is always there to bail them out. Oh, what a good, loving, supportive dad, right? But when they are engaging in these activities that he sees as problematic, I would view them as a cry for help, but he views them as problematic. They are written off and are not welcome back until they are repentant and in need of something from him.
Interesting. That's actually pretty fascinating. So he can constantly keep them on the line, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yes.
It looks like Dan's trying to pull something.
Yeah,
up
you know,
here.
Joel has been running his mouth a lot. So has Noel. And when I say run your mouth is when you're full of crap. You're an inarticulate buffoon running interference for your daddy while you have some pretty hideous things in your past. And I know that he's come out and he's called his sister a liar. When I did my records request, I didn't find any kind of a criminal record and or extended family contact for Danielle with Coeur d'Alene Police. But what I did find is that back in, looks like 10, 12 years ago, Joel, who is married, or maybe still is he still married to Erica?
No.
Okay. So an ex-wife, they were in a DV with your Aunt Brenda, where Erica apparently Brenda was watching their baby. It was in a car seat, so very, very young. They were, Brenda says in the police report, had been both on probation. They were up at the river drinking. She kept the baby overnight. They came back to get the baby. Brenda thought, hey, I don't like your parenting style. You guys are dangerous. This baby should not be with you. I'm not going to let you have the baby. Erica got mad. She ended up not only slapping Brenda a couple times across the face, she clawed her, and then she attempted to strangle her. And she was charged with battery. Joel, in one of the statements that Noel had shared with law enforcement in the same police report, had said that Joel had publicly stated to the family that if his mother, Brenda, ever disrespected or talked bad about Erica, his then wife, bad again, that she had his permission to punch her in the mouth. You know, and I'm looking at these statements, and yes, I understand. I was a police officer. I went to, many, many DVs in my 12-year career. I've seen just about everything. And I understand that families can have, difficulties and disputes. But when I look at these continual statements, or where Noel is being evicted or attempted to be evicted from that house by Coeur d'Alene Police, I see a pattern, as you're stating, of kids that are extremely messed up, misbehaving, not good citizens, a drain on the system. And Paul is, heading up at this time the Candlelight Church. It's growing, definitely from Scripture, based on what I have already seen in written reports. Unruly children that would disqualify him from not having a house in order because of their constant conduct. But yet we hear that he says recently that his house is in order. Joel running his mouth online the way he does right now. If Paul was smart, he would tell his children, shut up. You are not helping the situation. But what they're doing is they're making themselves not only look extremely dysfunctional, extremely white trash, but they're also making their dad look extremely stupid, not being able to, as the head pastor, as the head of the Van Noy family, he's not able to tell them, look, stop it. Do not talk. Let it go. Let people say what they're going to say. Everything that I'm seeing of these knuckleheads, Noel and Joel and Paul Jr. running their mouths, seem to make it even more clear as to how messed up the Van Noy family is.
Yeah. Honestly, it's like watching an episode of Jerry Springer unfold. And
Indeed.
It's a little sad for me because I really did, for a very, very long time, I looked at my family and was like so happy that we weren't that messed up. Come to find out that we really were. And it makes me really sad. I wish that I could save face a little bit more and say that I wasn't in any way related to them when stuff like this happens. But what are you going to do? It's part of my story, right?
And it just, I think as we are circling back and kind of wrapping this down, it leads me to the belief, which is that Paul is a showman. Yeah. He is an absolute con man that has done extremely stupid things. He's done extremely deviant things. He's done some things that he, by his own words, are illegal. He doesn't have his own family in order. He covers for those that violate his daughter and violates other young girls in his church. He's brought in a speaker recently that I was able to confirm had over, I think it was 3, if not 4 charges of child molestation that he's had come speak at the church multiple times. Also bragging that he has known sex offenders that were on the list inside his congregation walking around that he doesn't tell anybody. I mean, what is this? I have never seen somebody who is claiming that they're here in their, the respect level. I carry, as your uncle has said on recording, I'm a pretty big deal around here. My what does he say? I carry my weight, what's he talking about weight? My advice, it carries a lot of weight.
Oh, okay.
Something to that ilk. But
I don't hold it against Dan Wilson. He's not from here, so he probably doesn't know that I'm a pretty big deal in this town. Yeah. I want to say, in light of everything, Dan, he summarized that quite well as far as all of those aspects of Paul Van Noy. The conversation that you have not been able to have with him, and in light of new things that have transpired, new things that you've learned, and other things you brought here and shared with us today, what would that conversation with him be like if you were able to have that, your concerns? What would that sound like?
That's a really heavy question that I've actually been sitting with over the last handful of weeks. Watching all of this unfold, and getting involved, truly, because before I got involved, it wasn't really something that I wanted to think about because I don't talk to him. And part of the reason is because of this level of mistrust I've had in him for a very long time. I would ask, beg, plead that he step down and allow for an independent investigation into everything. I really don't think there is a way for him to get in front of it at this point, especially with his kids running their mouths, with the way that he's handling things, the double talk, all of the things going on. It's not a good look. The only thing that he can do at this point is to step away and allow the ministerial association to conduct an independent review of his church. are they doing the things that they're supposed to be doing? Like, is the money going where it's supposed to be going? Are the, parishioners safe with the people involved in the church that he's brought in? It's hard.
You used a very powerful word at the beginning, and it was that you saw the danger in having him continue in the position that he is, at least without that. Yeah. You see, what would that danger be?
He's not protecting the people he's supposed to be guarding. In my mind, due to my trauma, the trauma of the people that I work with, the trauma of the people I'm sworn to protect, when you do nothing, knowing that abuse is happening, it makes you just as bad, if not worse, than the people enacting it. Because what you're doing is you're turning a blind eye to those who need you the most.
Yeah, like I spoke last Saturday when we had our last broadcast. John 10 makes it very clear that the shepherd, which pastors are supposed to be the example of Jesus Christ as the good and great shepherd. In John 10, it talks about that a shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And when a hired hand is shepherding the flock, when evil, when robbers, when animals, bears, lions come to take the sheep, they run and hide because they have no skin in the game. They're just hired hands. They don't care about the flock. But a shepherd will lay his life down. And the thing that I am most struck with, I've said it many times, and I have to continue saying this. Take out all of the whole, I molested my next door neighbor. Take out the fact that the other heinous things that he has said that he's done and bragged about, the things that he has neglected even in his own church. The fact that any man, let alone a pastor, that would not move heaven and earth to make certain that his daughter receives justice is so incomprehensible to me that it not only depresses me, but it also stirs in me an anger like nothing in recent history that I can truly articulate. I cannot fathom a father that would not do anything he could to make certain that those that harmed his precious daughter were held accountable. And it leads me back to something that I believe is the most heinous thing of all. After we hear him bragging that he sexually molested his neighbor's daughter, he comes back and he tries to walk it back and say, well, we were both kids playing doctor. Well, people that play doctor as, preschool or grade school, they don't tell others in their adult lives that story. It has no relevance. You do foolish things as a child, but between this and between the other pedophiles, sex offenders that have been allowed inside the walls of that church, and many more that we're going to start talking about because those stories have been recently shared to us, it leads me to a conclusion that most of you out here are not going to like. And this is the conclusion, that Paul is actively protecting those that are sexual predators and violators over the flock because he has something far greater to hide.
Yeah. He is, for lack of a better word, the leader of a cult. And I think that there is a lot more going on that we don't know. I can't speak to what it is, but it's there.
Indeed. Well, Joy, we greatly appreciate you taking the time to come on and share from your perspective the dynamics of not only Paul, but his extended family, his immediate family, your extended family. We appreciate you for being vulnerable and for your mother allowing you to share her story. I know that Donna and I, as well as many others that have heard this story, our hearts have broken for your family, for your mother. And we will remember all of you in our prayers as we pray ultimately that truth would prevail and that justice would prevail and that healing could begin. So thank you so much for contacting us. Thank you for telling your story, and may God bless you and your family.
Thank you for your courage, Joy.
Yeah, thank you guys for hearing me out.
Yep.
I want to remind those out here who are listening, whether it's over the holiday or a couple days past, whenever you happen to see this, that the views that were just expressed are those of our guest. We don't have a magic wand, crystal ball to be able to validate anything that was said, but we have seen patterns and patterns that have emerged between multiple witnesses that say very similar things. And it's ultimately up for you right here in this community to start demanding accountability. To date, no pastors that I'm aware of in this community have heard. And by the way, when I'm out and about in this community, you're coming up to me. You people are coming up to me and saying, we have seen what's going on. We have seen it. We are with you for standing up for the truth. Where are the pastors in this county or even in the region or out of state that have said, Paul, the accusations are too great right now. We have heard you in your own mouth gleefully admitting that you had molested a neighbor's daughter. We have recent pictures of your own staff standing next to registered sex offenders. No accountability. Where are you pastors that are saying, Paul, time to step aside, let an investigation begin by those that can come in and start assessing whether or not you have violated your oath to Jesus Christ and the Word of God? Do we just have a bunch of cowards in this county when it comes to the pastors? Are you guys all too busy with your Christmas services? This is a very serious deal. I know law enforcement has already begun an investigation. Ultimately, we hope that truth prevails sooner than later. Justice delayed is justice denied. Thank you so much for tuning in. Donna, take us out.
Thank you for joining us tonight on this special edition of the Liberty Without Compromise broadcast. Again, our thanks to Joy and also to her mother, Judy, for being willing to share such difficult and sensitive information. I know that that will not be without impact to them, and that took a lot of braveness and courage. You can learn more by visiting our website at libertywithoutcompromise.com. You can get past episodes there and also see some of our other exposés. Follow our YouTube channel. That is at The Idaho Sheriff. All of these live streams are archived on our YouTube channel at The Idaho Sheriff. You can follow us on Facebook at The Idaho Sheriff or at Liberty Without Compromise.
Hey, Matt Smith, you want to talk a big game? You and your Chat GPT. We know that an old burned out heavy metal wannabe rocker doesn't have enough brain cells to articulate all those. Plus, I have the numerous police reports where your statements, I know you're not that smart. Why don't you come on this show? I'll give you a link. You want to say all you're saying, you're bullshit, you want to keep spouting it? Let's come on, you and me. I'm begging you, come on. I can't wait to talk to you. You want to run your mouth before all these people? We'll let you do it.
Yeah.
But you can't use Chat GPT.
Yeah, I was going to say, he was running his mouth with Chat GPT today.
I mean, supposedly I'm a leftist. I'm a brown shirt.
Yeah.
Standing up for the innocent, standing up for truth and justice.
Yeah, how does that...
You pogue.
How does that work? All right.
Have a good night. Merry Christmas.